Okay, today's class is going to be on 10 things that a listing agent should look for when you receive an agreement of sale from a buyer agent. So let's dive right into this. First thing, tax ID, very critical. And the reason why, if you have two or more parcels in one sale, a lot of times we'll have a parcel with a property on it, a house, an improvement, and then a vacant land that maybe they bought as a double lot. And then you just put one parcel in and never put the other parcel in, and it gets recorded. And here the previous owner still owns that parcel. So just make sure that if you are selling a property and it indicates that there's more than one parcel, that should just be a red light. Highlight it, whatever you need to do. But especially tell the title company too, so that they are aware and look into that section of the agreement of sale. Okay. The other issues we have sometimes is new construction where there's no address yet. Okay. The identifier is that tax ID. Okay. The parcel number or the lot number. Okay. And then another source of mix-up for this is when we have multiple units for sale on the same street. Oftentimes you'll have an investor client call you and say, hey, I want to get rid of all these properties on Main Street. Well, he has like 6 of them. And, sometimes the addresses and the parcel don't match up and whatnot. So you have to be very, very careful and really take a look into that so that the right property gets transferred. Okay. So you're not selling this address with a different parcel number. Okay. So that's number one. Second thing, purchase price and deposit. Sounds very simple, but first thing, make sure the number that you write out and the number that you spelled out match. Okay. If it's supposed to say 450,000, make sure the number and the number spelled out matches. Okay. The deposit delivery time frame. Make sure that match. And you know exactly when that deposit is due. Okay. The default is 5 days. Lately, I've seen some agents put in 7 days, a whole week. So if that's not something that your client, your seller likes, you should negotiate that time frame. Okay. And then the other thing I have down is deposit and box on 26G. So let's just go to that box real quick. I'm going to try to switch my screen here real quick. So you can see the agreement of sale. Let's go back to this box, 26G. We always check mark it, but what the heck does it mean? On line 733, G. Seller is limited to retaining those sums paid by buyer, including deposit monies, as liquidated damages. So basically it means that the most that the seller can collect from the buyer is what's been paid into the deal. Okay, deposit money. So my rule of thumb, and I'll switch it back here again. If there's a low deposit, uncheck that box. Okay. If somebody's putting $1,000 down, well, the most the seller can ever collect is $1,000. What if you had the seller move out of the house, go rent another property, or make arrangements to do something that costs a lot more than $1,000? Okay. So if it's a low deposit, leave that box unchecked. At least that's my advice, so that if the seller wants to pursue and sue the buyer for more than $1,000, they can. Then I have high deposit, check mark that box. Okay, just make sure it's enough to cover your seller. Okay, so that's number 2. Second thing I look at. Third thing, paragraphs 3 and 4. Okay, that's still on page 2 of the agreement of sale. And I have down lots of blanks. There's a lot of blanks there, right? Let's see if I can switch back again. We're going to go back to that page 2 there. Paragraphs 3 and 4. So there you go. I have it all highlighted there. And newer agents miss this a lot of times when they go over with sellers. First thing I have is seller help. Okay. Make sure that if it's supposed to be 0, it says 0. Okay. Don't leave it blank. Put in something there, fill it in. Okay. Or if there is an actual number there, make sure when you do the estimated seller's cost sheet to include it. Okay. Oftentimes, sometimes we forget it. We've had a situation here where an agent forgot to include it in their estimated sales cost, and it was like a 3% closing cost help. Well, that put the seller in the negative. Okay. That put the seller in the negative, and he had to bring money to the table. So if the seller doesn't have the money to do it, they can't sell the property. And unfortunately, in that situation, the agent had to help the seller, okay, with a reduced commission. So just make sure that you check up on that. The settlement date. And the reason I say settlement date, look at it, is because sometimes agents, I've seen them mix the settlement date with the response and acceptance date in paragraph 5. Okay. They mix it up, they reverse it. So just make sure that you have that correct. The prorations. Okay. Generally, it's left blank, but sometimes with creative write-ups these days, a buyer agent may say, well, the seller can retain all the taxes or whatnot. Okay. Deed type, usually don't see that, but just in case, just make sure that it's what it's supposed to be. And then the transfer tax. Okay, especially if you're going through multiple offers, that's the spot where buyer agents should write in if the seller gets to pay 0% and the buyer pays both sides, the 2%. Okay, don't skip over that because that could be a good negotiating point for your seller. Okay, so that's number 3. We switch back. Number 4, the zoning. Make sure zoning classification is filled. Let the buyer agent know what to fill out after your research. So if you're getting a new listing and it's zone mixed village use or something like that, it's not just a normal residential property, make sure you get that from the tax map and put it into your listing so that when buyer agents fill out the contract, they know to put that under the zoning. Because according to that little paragraph, if you recall from our lesson, a buyer can void the agreement of sale and get their deposit money back. Okay. If it's anything other than used for single family. Okay. So that's number 4. Number 5, fixtures and personal property. I think if Tim was on the call, he would probably say this is one of the top calls that he gets when there's issues with a buyer and seller. Okay. And it always happens at the walkthrough. Okay. At the very end, when the buyer's walking through the property right before they're purchasing it, and they notice that the wood stove is missing. Okay. So I just have in there that items included, excluded, and leased, be specific. Okay. And not just that, but know what's in that list of included, because it goes into pretty specific items. Talks about plants, whether they're potted or not. Okay. So if you know the list and you know what the buyer wants and what the seller is excluding or what's leased, you'll have a much smoother deal. Okay. But again, it always happens towards the end of the deal because that's when the buyer does their walkthrough, and it's whatever item that was supposed to be there is missing. Number 6, the commitment date. Okay, so we went over this the other day. Make sure there is a commitment date filled out. Okay. Especially for a list agent, ask the lender if they can accommodate. Okay. If you have a 30-day settlement and they have in there that the commitment date is due in 2 weeks, that may not be enough time. Okay. I'm sure the lender can give you a letter, but it'll say, well, it's still pending this, this, and this. So really, it doesn't really mean anything if there are still outstanding items. Okay. So just ask the lender if they can accommodate and make sure there is a commitment date filled out. Okay. The interest rate. 7th thing I look at is the interest rate. So why? Okay, you want to check it against the pre-approval that was given to you. And most pre-approvals these days do include it, but some don't have the interest rate. Okay, so you may want to call the lender and just ask them before you go over it with your seller, hey, these folks wrote an offer on this property. They have down an interest rate of this. What is your rate right now? Okay. The interest rate on the pre-approval should be the minimum, not the middle of the range or maximum. So I have an example there that if the pre-approval says 5.5%, but the range they give in the contingency box, it should say 5.5 to 6.5, or some kind of range where that 5.5 is the minimum and it's maxed out at a higher rate. Okay. What you don't want to see is if the pre-approval says 5.5, meaning if they locked in today, it'd be 5.5%, but the range says 4.5 to 5.5. So they didn't really give you a range, right? It may look like a range on paper, but it's not really a range because they're already getting 5.5. So anything higher than that, they can call out the mortgage contingency. Okay. So just be careful with that. Check the pre-approval, talk to the lender, and make sure that there is good range for you. Okay. Number 8, unresolved deposit dispute days. So the default is 180 days, right? Make sure your seller has ample time to file mediation or litigate. I think a lot of agents these days, they do change that and make it anywhere from 30 to 60 days. I've seen some with 2 weeks on it. You may want to look at that and make sure that there's ample time for your seller to file for mediation or litigate. Okay. Any questions on that one, Patty? Do you have any questions? Okay. So that's number 8. Number 9, the special clauses paragraph. So check mark all necessary attachments to the agreement of sale. So that's where you check mark if there's a sale and settlement contingency, if there's an appraisal contingency attached, any short sale addendums, escalation clauses, or just a general addendum. So if you want it included with the agreement of sale, make sure it's check mark. Okay. And read it too and make sure you have the attachment. So that's number 9. Number 10, additional terms. I have down leave blank. Okay. If you receive an offer and it's written out in that section, and the buyer agent wrote their own terms and contingencies and addendum or whatnot, if it's filled in, find the appropriate form and have the buyer agent fill it out. Okay. And I gave 3 examples here. Example 1, house must appraise. Okay. We used to see that all the time. We're seeing less and less of it now because I think agents these days do use the appraisal contingency, but every so often we'll get an agent that just writes in house must appraise or house must appraise for sales price. Okay. But what that doesn't tell you is by when or appraised for what, right? And what happens if it doesn't appraise. Okay. So it has to have the who, what, when, where, and why. And that's why we should use the appraisal contingency form. Another one, buyer allows seller to stay free for 30 days. Is that free including utilities? What about the insurance? You know, if the person living in the house, their dog bites somebody, what happens? Okay. Who mows the grass? Who's maintaining the property? Okay. That's why you use a post-settlement possession addendum. And if it's longer than 2 weeks, you may want to have a lease agreement. Okay. Another example is buyer agrees to pay $15,000 over appraised value. That's fine if everybody agrees to that, but does the seller have the right to say no? What if the property was listed at 300,000? You have this little phrase in there, and the house only appraises for 225. Is your seller willing to sell it for 240? Okay, so again, that could be avoided by simply using the appraisal contingency form. So that's the 10th thing I look for, is to make sure that that page is blank. And if not, then I'll try to help the buyer agent find the right form so that we can fill it out and the deal will go much smoother then. So any questions on this? I know this was a short one, fast one, but you know, it's 10 items that I generally look for. It's not the only 10 things I look for. I mean, I look at the whole agreement of sale, but I try to give these 10 things extra attention just because I know that if you don't, things can go awry and it'll look really bad with your client.